Day zero is the moment before company formation, when a founder decides to take the plunge, follow their dream, and commit to pursuing their vision of change. On day zero, you'll hear founders tell their story. From the initial idea, through reactions by critics and skeptics, setbacks and successes, we'll cover it all. Behind every company is a founder with ambition, goals, dreams, and wisdom to be shared. Let's explore them together.
Well, good morning, Dan, and welcome.
Gary, good to be with you, my friend.
We're pleased to have you at this microphone. As you know, Dan, this show is about leadership and leadership excellence, of which you've displayed plenty. What did the young Dan think about leadership?
Gary, I think I mentioned this before. I was born into a very large family. My parents had 9 children and then adopted 6 boys. And
Wow.
So I was born right in the middle. I was 7th of 15 children. So I grew up with a very dynamic environment. And I learned in that environment, a lot of very intelligent people. You got to work with the group to get them to go anywhere. And I loved my experience growing up. I love my family. We're all really close. But I think I learned early on group dynamics and how to operate in a group and how to move people along. And that served me well, I think, in politics and other areas of my life.
When did you pick up your interest in healthcare?
Well, my dad is an endocrinologist. I was actually born in Nashville. He was a professor of medicine at Vanderbilt. I moved back to Idaho, where my mother was from, and because he had 2 nephews and a niece with type 1 diabetes, and nobody to care for them. And so when my dad wanted to start his practice, he wanted to be close to home so he could care for on my mom's side, two nephews and a niece, and then built a practice in Idaho Falls. And my brother now is an endocrinologist. A brother-in-law is an internal medicine doctor up there who practices. I have another brother who's an orthopedic surgeon. So I've been around medicine a lot in my life. I almost thought about becoming a doctor until I ended up with a B in anatomy at BYU, and I realized, my mind doesn't work quite like my brother's minds do.
When did you become interested in politics from the standpoint that you were a senator, Utah state senator, and then ran for the U.S. Senate from Utah? Pretty special stuff.
I fell into politics kind of serendipitously. I'd moved to Bountiful, Utah, and I thought, maybe I'll explore running for local office, just kind of give back. And I ended up meeting Senator Dan Eastman, who was, unbeknownst to anybody, ready to hang up and retire. And I remember calling him and said, "Hey, do you have any advice?" He invited me to his house right then. And he said, "I'm not going to run. You should run." And I was 33 years old. And I said, "Look, I have no experience." He said, "It doesn't matter. You're smart. You can do it." And so I threw my hat in the ring and got elected. And, it happened so fast, I barely realized I was a politician.
Well, after some years in business, as you said, founded your own company, you made your way to Intermountain Healthcare. What led to that decision, Dan?
So as you mentioned, I ran for the U.S. Senate in 2012 against Senator Orrin Hatch and in the primary. And I did force him into a primary for the first time in 36 years. But he absolutely destroyed me in that race. Gary, he beat me 2-1. It wasn't even close. And, I'd sold my interest in my business. I was 38. You don't retire at 38. And so I didn't know what I was going to do. And I had a former Bain colleague of mine who was the CFO of our pediatric hospital, Primary Children's, reach out to me and said, you should really come and work at Intermountain. And Gary, I honestly said, what would I do? I have no idea what I would do. But I'd worked with Intermountain on the Medicaid reforms and really held the organization in high esteem. And they kind of made a job for me. I was director of special projects in our population health department. And then I've been here almost 10 years now and just fell in love with the complexity of it all. The stakes are so high. Public policy melded together with new technology, with a complex payment environment, all of that captured me. And I've loved it. And trying to kind of figure out how to navigate through all of that and drive change has been worth investing the productive years of my life doing. And I've loved it. So it's been really fun.
You're personally doing a heck of a job of it, as is Intermountain. So well done, Dan. You laid out that you kind of gravitated toward complexity in finance when you were in the state Senate at Utah. You've done the same here at Intermountain. What led to envisioning CivicaRx, which is a heavy lift any way you look at that? What led to that, Dan?
So Civica came out of so when I left the legislature and I lost my race, I had a local newspaper come to me and say, the largest newspaper in Utah, will you write a weekly column for the paper? And by the way, we're not going to pay you to do it. It's going to be volunteer. And so I said, it was the editor is a really good friend. And I said, I'll do it. I'll try it. So I began writing a column in late 2012 and, weekly column, wrote over 200 columns. But in January of 2016, when Martin Shkreli, the pharma bro, took Daraprim, captured it, raised the price by 5,000%. I'm an econ guy at heart. I'm a free market guy. I want the markets to work. And it bothered me that he was out there saying, well, this is just capitalism. This is how capitalism works. There's no morality to it. And that bothered me. And then 6 months later, I was writing about EpiPen, and it was a similar thing. And I realized, these are drugs that have been on the market for years. How does a company corner those and then rip off patients and hurt people? And again, the comment was, this is how our system works. And I said, well, that shouldn't be how it works. And so I just started thinking in the summer of 2016, why are they allowed to do this? Meaning, what are the market forces that are allowing this to happen? And Gary, came really down to three things. They can only do this when there's inelastic demand for a product, meaning you don't get the product, you die, right? You couldn't do this with candy bars. They can do this with insulin. They can do this with EpiPen and with Daraprim. And then I thought, well, there's obviously economies of scale in manufacturing, and that's a big part of this. But the third component was I realized that in some of these markets, only one manufacturer was required to meet the market demand. And so when you have those three factors, inelastic demand, economies of scale, and you only need one manufacturer, trying to bring competition, it's really hard if you've got double the manufacturing capacity for the competition. The closest analog at Gary was actually a public utility. You think about power, same thing. You've got inelastic demand, huge economies of scale, and you only need one. And so in most of those environments, we regulate those environments. We represent consumers in those environments by regulating price to some extent. And I just run for the U.S. Senate. I didn't feel like Congress was going to do anything. So I started thinking, outside of a regulatory regime, what could we do? And I just thought, well, the opposite of a monopoly is a monopsony. It's a purchasing monopoly. So let's just go organize the demand side of the equation and just build something new. And that's where the idea of Civica came, to create a nonprofit drug company that would act like a public utility that nobody would own. And now 4 years later, we make 64 drugs, and that'll be closer to 80 by the end of this year. We've treated 35 million patients. We've made almost 100 million doses of medication. And, I'm the volunteer board chair, and I'll never make a penny off of it. And that's exactly what makes me happy. We're just trying to bring low cost to patients.
Credit to you, and we appreciate your service because it is making a difference for sure. How did you envision the funding, the startup capital, if you will, Dan, to kick off Civica?
Well, we looked at it and said, well, obviously, you got to capitalize the business. And a lot of the return on investment, Gary, actually, we were looking to stabilize the drugs for our own hospital systems. When you went and talked to a chief pharmacy officer and they've got 200 drugs on a whiteboard they're trying to track down for their patients, drugs we use every day, it was an enormous drag on them. And so we knew we'd get a return on investment just by stabilizing this for our business. Our core business would run better. We'd treat our patients better. And so when we brought the idea forward and said, look, it's going to be a nonprofit, we're going to finance this with contributions and mostly with debt, a debt instrument, a long-term debt instrument that the health systems would put up. We brought in also 3 philanthropy partners as well. So we'll repay the debt with a 5% interest rate, reasonable interest rate, but nobody owns it. There's no profit taking, nothing. Just once that debt's paid off, nobody owns it. In fact, nobody owns it day one. And when we started framing that up and built the case that we would be able to stabilize our core business, bring prices down for our core business, we get returns both on the core business, and then we'll get a fair return on the debt. It became a no-brainer. I mean, that's why so many people joined to say, yeah, we know this is going to help our core business, but we also know that this that there's a reasonable return in addition to the people who put up the upfront capital.
How's it decided which drugs you're going to develop?
So, Gary, the way that works, and this is maybe the most important part of Civica, how do you enter a market where you have a dominant incumbent player who has a monopoly? And what we devised was this idea of a minimum viable volume. So what we do is we go to our membership group and they identify the drugs they're struggling to get, or they feel like either the supply or the cost is wrong, or they're worried about it. And we get together, we discuss, okay, which drug do you want us to make? But then we get upfront purchase commitments from our members before we bring a drug to market. And they are 5-year take or pay arrangements, meaning they take the product for us or they pay for it anyway. Now, the good thing is we can actually come out with a very competitive price because, we're not a profit-taking entity. We are only trying to actually make enough margin to have the business be self-sustaining. And that has led to our success. So we don't want our members. We're not after market share with Civica. We're after market impact. We don't want our members to put all of their volume with us. We want them to put a sizable chunk with us so that we can enter, but that we can also set a fair market price.
So the 2 key factors, it sounds like, are shortages and price. Those would be the 2 decision points on whether you pursue to develop a particular drug. Is that right?
Yes, on the hospital side in particular.
Yeah.
On the outpatient side, and I know we're going to get to there in just a second, it really is about price manipulation. It's not, the drugs aren't short on the outpatient side, but there's a lot of shenanigans around pricing that we're working through. It's a different set of issues, but a similar outcome. Patients don't have access to drugs they need.
So you announced pursuing insulin earlier this year. When will that be? Is that a 23 or 24 release date?
Yeah, so we announced in March of this year that Civica will be producing 3 molecules of insulin, generic versions or biosimilar versions of Humalog, Novolog, and Lantus. So Humalog and Novolog are the fast-acting insulins that type 1 diabetics, people with type 1 diabetes use. And then, Lantus or Glargine is a basal insulin that is used for both type 1 and type 2 diabetes. And we're bringing all 3 molecules to market. But between those 3, they make up about 85% of the insulin prescriptions in the country, and probably will end up being more because a lot of people are on older insulins because they can't afford those 3. So we partnered with a company called Genesis that was 4 years into a 8-year or 7-year development cycle, and Genesis will be our partner. And we hope to go into clinical trials next year. And hopefully we expect in 2024 to bring those insulins to market beginning in 2024. And Gary, the more important thing is, look, these insulins, the price has gone up on average by 11% a year, the list price for 20 years.
Oh my gosh.
And this is after their patented life. And so, look, these drugs are clearly in the public domain. They should be, and we are going to put them in the public domain. So Civica is committed that our insulin vials will sell for no more retail, no more than $30 a vial. And a 5-pack of 3 milliliter flex pens will be no more than $55. And that reflects an 85 to 90% price reduction on those drugs. And we are intent on democratizing insulin.
You mentioned that Civica scripts, that they cover roughly 140 million people. I mean, that's roughly 40% of the people in the country, which is just a terrific group proportion.
And we have, honestly, Gary, we have more join us all the time. And look, nobody likes the current situation. Nobody likes it. I think people feel trapped in it. Certainly patients are at the tail end of it. We believe that medicines, that once they're in the public domain, and we want the innovators to keep innovating. But once the drugs are past their patented life and those formulas are owned by society at that point, we're intent on making sure they're within reach of regular people who need them. And if there is anything, a modern day equivalent of owing your soul to the company store, Gary, it's have a chronic disease and not have any ability to impact how much you pay. And we those are the people that come to mind. That was the impetus for Civica.
Yep. Well, once again, well done there. By the way, so Mark Cuban started his cost plus drug company with great fanfare, by the way. But how does that relate to CivicaRx, Dan?
Well, listen, we're thrilled with what Mark and Alex Oshmiansky are doing. Alex and I have been friends for some time now. He, in fact, when we announced Civica, he called me and came out and met with me. He said, "Hey, I'm thinking about something similar." And the thing is, it's a target-rich environment. We're thrilled. In fact, we will happily sell our Civica insulin through their pharmacy. We just wanted to get to patients. I think their pricing structure and how they're thinking about the world, transparent and fair, is exactly what the market needs. And I hope there are more pharmacies who take up that banner. It should be the case. And so we're wishing them well. But we will work with any pharmacy who will abide by our pricing philosophy. And that is, we expect a transparent price. We expect you to let people know what a fair price is. And that's how Civica will work. So I'm just so thrilled that other people are working on this problem. It's going to take more than just Civica to fix it.
Right. Well, you led the way. You made the point when we were speaking last week, it's not so much about market share, but market impact that counts. Dan, can you describe that for us or share that thought with us?
Yeah, going back to the beginning, Gary, look, for me, it was the government probably has an interest in figuring out how to make sure monopolies don't exist for generic drugs. But their willingness to do so, to regulate, is one thing. But I'm not sure they would have the capacity to do it either. Unless you're actually in the market, participating in the market as an honest broker, it's really hard to move anything. So the whole idea of Civica was, how do we stabilize the market, stabilize the price? If we can do that, so if you think about it, we've got about a third of the U.S. hospitals. We're asking those hospitals to give us half of their volume. So we're really only moving 10 to 12% of the market. But if we can move 10 to 12% of the market and have the price come down by 90% and be fair, that's what we're after. We want the patients to have the benefit.
You spent a lot of time in the pharmacy industry, or at least pharmaceutical industry, over the last 5-6 years. How would you redesign the pharmaceutical industry and the associated distribution? How would you redesign that if you could, Dan?
Well, a full 1/4 of people with diabetes, type 1 diabetes, are rationing insulin. So they're delaying their care. They're creating long-term impacts. It's stressful. And I think that rebate scheme for drugs that are clearly past their patented life is actually hurting patients. And so if I were going to redesign it, I would just say, hey, be open, transparent. You need manufacturers that are open and transparent. You need retailers to say, we insist on transparency. Because if there were transparency, this wouldn't be able to happen. And that's what we're working on, transparency. We're not asking for any special regulations from Congress to support our business model, although, frankly, it's been very popular with both sides of the aisle. But we believe transparency should be the hallmark of drug supply chains. Absolutely. And that's where we're focused.
So, Dan, from an idea on a treadmill 6 years ago to CivicaRx and Civica Scripts, you've made an enormous impact. What's next for you and what's next for Civica?
Well, we're just getting started. We're building a 140,000 square foot manufacturing facility in Petersburg, Virginia. That'll be online later this year. That's where we'll begin our batch runs for our FDA approval for insulin, but we'll make a whole variety of drugs in that facility. We're just plowing ahead. The company is doing well. We're ahead of budget. We're ahead of schedule. We've got really good leadership helping us guide Civica along, and with some of the best leaders around in healthcare around the country sitting on our board. Excellent buy-in. For example, Bill Rutherford, the CFO of HCA, is our finance chair. Dennis Dolan, the CFO of Mayo Clinic, is our comp committee chair. We've got excellent operators and clinicians involved with us, and that's fun. And then, it feels like the sky's the limit from a impact perspective. And so, every drug that is necessary, where there's no close substitutes, we're watching those markets to make sure they function. If they function well and their drug's available and fairly priced, we'll have no interest in intervening. But when it's not, that'll be in our crosshairs.
Dan, this has been a terrific interview as expected. Once again, congratulations on all that you've accomplished in a relatively short period of time at that. I have two final questions, more from a leadership standpoint. What advice would you give a young person who's got a challenging venture idea and they're looking at pushing that rock up the hill and say, gosh, I don't know if I can do this or not? What kind of advice would you give that person?
I think maybe the most important thing, I had this idea, I had no idea how to do it. I knew nothing about drug manufacturing, like zero, except for some. So I learned everything I could learn. And I found some experts and I just badgered them with questions to teach me. And I brought new insights that they hadn't thought of before that kind of just created this magic. And I would say we were always iterating on the hypothesis, and the business model emerged after a lot of discussion and a lot of iteration. And there were moments where I was like, I don't want to give up a certain part of this model because I think it's perfect. But I had other folks come and say, you're not seeing this clearly, and here's how it actually works. But we always iterated on the hypothesis, and we are continuing as a board to iterate on the hypothesis. So I'd say, if there's something that inspires you, go after it. Learn everything you can learn. And then be comfortable to change your mind and iterate on what it means, how it will work. It was that resiliency that allowed us to craft this idea into Civica. And I don't think any big ideas happen any other way, to be honest. You got to have passion for it. You got to learn everything you can learn. Be a learn-it-all person, not a know-it-all person. And then iterate with people that are smart.
Great advice. Final question is a more general question for up-and-coming healthcare leaders. What advice would you have for them?
I would ask the people who are involved, just lean in. It's worth investing your life to do. Yeah, there are opportunity costs. You could leave, you could do other things, probably make more money. But I tell you, I find deep meaning, and I've done well. I've made money. I find more meaning in what I'm doing today than anything I've ever done. And that, when you find that sweet spot in your career, in your life, it's a great place to be. And I would just keep looking for that. But I hope that people will continue to invest their productive, creative energies to help us solve these issues. Because as goes healthcare, so goes the country.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you for your time today. Terrific interview.
Thanks, Gary.